Welcome to our AI Leadership in Action webinar. This is the third in the series of what we've been doing, and we were giving details of the previous ones we've done. So today I'm Andrew Gaule, and I've been leading tech change within corporates for about 20 plus years and been working very heavily in the AI space, and that most recently joined by Charlotte. Charlotte, would you briefly introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlotte Elmer. I have an organisation that supports businesses with regards to their transformation, specifically at the moment, looking at the people change element around the implementation of AI and how that sits across the broader executive corporate strategy into embedding through people process and general cultural change as well. So that's what I specialise in.
And Cilla?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Glad to see everybody. And I similar role to Charlotte, but I lead Oxbow, and we're a transformational change organisation, particularly focused on organisational change. And focus for me is around setting the climate and tone, and the right strategic intent for the implementation of AI. So, looking forward to our session today.
Thank you. So yeah, what we're going to try and accomplish over the next sort of 45 minutes, plus we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers, is to set the foundations of understanding really this intersection between the AI wave of technology that's coming at us and the business change related to that, and the people side of this transformation journey. So it's how we can align those, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and how we can prove the big potential that's coming, thinking about it within an ethical framework for decision making and for responsible sort of deployment. But so important that we're going to have this interaction between the people and the business change and the AI technology that sort of comes behind it. So please, while we're going through the session today, put comments and that within the chat, and we will have time for questions and that after it. So I'd like to hand over to Charlotte to kick us off.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. So the things that I'm going to talk to you about, this is this kind of a context setting, is some of the trends that we're recognizing as consultants and individuals that are still really learning about AI. And I think that's something just to set that context. This is new to us all. So management of expectation. There are some more obviously academic and PhD type experts in this field. But I think the majority is that this is a learning mindset for most of us. And what we're starting to see more and more is actually that this is AI is starting to become more embedded in core business processes. It might not be perfect, but it's definitely top of the agenda and conversation at the board table now. So this rapid adoption is happening specifically in some industries rather than others. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like as we go through some real world examples through today. This hybrid workforce. So what we mean by this is that we're starting to see not necessarily hybrid in the way that we work from at home and office, but actually teams now include both human expertise and AI capabilities working in tandem. So we could put that into position of we've got bot and human working together. But what's still in development is the boundary between them and the ethical uses of what that looks like in practice. So we're starting to see this hybrid workforce emergence too. We covered in some earlier webinars that we did around the future of skills and what this looks like and how skills are evolving. For those of you that are interested, we can share more around this, but fundamentally, we'll see within the next 5 to 6 years that the ability to handle AI and data is one of the leading skills that required as individuals in the workplace. This currently sits around 6th or 7th, okay? So we can see this transformation of actually the type of people businesses will be requiring to allow them to evolve for the future. And this is probably one of the things that I've been quite quizzical about over the past 5 to 6 months is this organizational mindset. So when initially AI came to market, everyone's like, oh my goodness, AI is going to replace everything. It's going to replace all the jobs. That might be true in some areas. However, we're now really starting to translate that thinking into the language of AI augmentation mindset with regards to how do the two sit together. And it kind of links nicely to what I just spoke about, this hybrid workforce and what this is going to emerge to look like. So if we think about why does this really matter between this AI alignment and people, fundamentally, the human element supporting this is that employee confidence and understanding is at the core front of actually building the trust, so that even though that we've got most sophisticated AI tools and tech now, and you could argue that the tech's there and it's just going to continually evolve and development, but are us as humans and our people that we might be working with, are we engaged in this, and do we have the confidence to execute? And the trust with regards to what the organization might be doing and what that means to us as an individual. So this human element still needs to be explored from a trust factor. We also really need to consider, as I just said, building on the AI is going to augment our human intelligence. What does that actually mean from a trust perspective, but also from an ethical practice? So we need to think about to ensure there's an alignment between the two, so that people understand what we're doing. And we had a conversation with the client just a couple of weeks out where some people feel like they might be cheating or perceived to be cheating if they use AI, because it's not discussed in the culture yet in the public domain in regards to actually how we use AI to amplify our own intelligence from an ethical practice and the business trust that how individuals are using it. So there's a conversation there to consider. As I just mentioned, the tech side of AI is fundamentally there and is continuing to build, but actually it means nothing if our people aren't engaged in regards to how organizations are transforming this. So change resistance can be at the forefront, particularly if you've got a workforce that you know already change resistant from other projects that you might have run, whether it's implementing a new system or a new process. We need to really consider actually what change is and how it actually sits from a technology standpoint, where potentially individuals might be questioning the risks to their job. We then need to just consider our own ethical responsibilities with regards to our own human values. Does this sit comfortably with me as an individual? And the link between human values and personal values and organizational purpose to ensure it's not the other way around. And this is where sometimes I'm sure we all can resonate this. Sometimes we get this disconnect in organizations where people's own human personal values are at odds potentially where the organization's going and how it might be doing it. We need to consider this as well through this implementation. So fundamentally, sustainable performance and what this needs to consider about is that this requires humans and AI to complement each other and bring this thing for taking a strengths-based approach with regards to where we're heading as organisations while mitigating any risks. However, the bottom line, you can read it on this slide, is that AI without human alignment is just expensive automation. True transformation happens when technology and people work together with shared purpose. And the biggest one for me is trust. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrew with regards to that, considering what this might look like with some of the tools and areas that businesses are currently exploring.
Good. Thank you, Charlotte. So in the previous sessions, I've covered it during these webinars, some of the technology around using text and images and the power of these things now to analyze documents, to create image, analyze those. In the July session, we looked at how audio is now so powerful for doing translations, for generating avatars, where the sound and the vision is extremely difficult now to see the difference between the human and the avatar and the computer AI generated. And in some cases, I'm sort of spotting, oh, it's so good, that must be the avatar, that must be AI. In this session, I'm not going to demonstrate the technology so much, but to talk about agents and robots and the systems where now, as Charlotte was just talking about, where they're going to be augmenting the people and the processes within sort of organizations. But first of all, what are the steps that organizations need to go through and individuals need to go through in navigating moving online and moving with AI? First of all, it's really important to build some understanding of AI and capabilities. And over the last 2.5 years, while I've been running AI workshops to bring executives up to speed and bring individuals up to speed on what some of these technologies are now capable of, people are now using AI probably in their own personal productivity and in their work sort of productivity. But as Charlotte said, maybe not using it within their organizational sort of context. So organizations now really need to review where their organization's current processes are. So how they're winning sales, how they're doing proposals, how they're creating output, how they're taking orders, how they're operationally sort of running their businesses, and see how AI can be used as an assistant. And I'll be giving some examples of these in a moment. And then you need to think about implementing enterprise AI processes on a secure data and AI platform. With some of the organizations and individuals I'm now working with, they're now seeing a concern that individuals are using AI, but not with a secure platform. And there's a risk of data going out and company knowledge going out and being put into models and into databases that are not secure. So organizations really need to think about what platforms they're now going to be on so that the data is secure, but also importantly, that the information and the knowledge and the best practices is shared across all individuals. And then you can test drive solutions. And I'm going to be giving a couple of examples of those in a moment. And hopefully you can draw parallels to your own organization where you can start implementing these things. Once you've done some test drives, rolling it out and reviewing it, and then seeing where the business model could be changing in your industry. I'm an angel investor. I'm working with a lot of investment firms, and we are now seeing fantastic and really innovative startups that are going to use AI to change the business model of industries and sectors. So you really need to be thinking about where things are going to be changing within your organization. So what's the current status of the tech and the business value? So as I said, personal productivity tools have been able to improve your capabilities in writing emails, analyzing documents, creating reports, having a secure platform for teams to work together so that work and knowledge that's done by some people within the organization can then be shared. Some organizations have got this sort of the Microsoft Copilot, but I really don't think that they've really taken the power on board of what those things can be doing, and there's risks in how these things are currently being done. And then can we use AI to augment the workers? So text and audio integration. And I'll give an example in a moment where AI, I think now is good enough and can create lots of value and productivity, but it's not the almighty. And then can we use avatars? So if any of you have seen the likes of HeyGen is my preferred avatar creator, the quality and the work of creating avatars which look like you, sound like you, and I've done some examples of those going back a year ago now. Looking on my LinkedIn post, you'll sort of see that. I'll show an example later where the avatar now is as good as the human. It's without the ums and the ahs and all that as well. And then in the future, we're going to have robots, humanoid type robots, autonomous vehicles, autonomous systems, which physically embody AI. So these are the phases we're going to go through. And probably step 3 is where I think we are at the moment about text and audio sort of integration. So we're going to move from humans largely doing the work to computers supporting us to where AI in the future can be taking on doing a lot of the mundane processes and maybe creating new business models. So examples I'm going to be giving in a moment are around research and content, sales processes where audio and automated services could be, and an investment sort of example. And the challenge for leaders now is how do you orchestrate these new types of technologies in new value chains within your organization or in new sectors. Now, a framework that I published in a book about 8 years ago is where I term my 5 Ps. So working through these for an organization, thinking about what is your strategic purpose. Now, it might be to reduce costs, it might be to enter a new market, it might be to augment the services you currently got, whether that's in in sales or whether it could be in a knowledge type based business. What's the process and method and governance are you going to go through for the change? And the next steps that I talked about a moment ago about AI implementation is an example of a process of thinking through how you're going to change. And the examples I'll give in a moment where AI is being implemented is a process example within sales order taking, for example. And then central to this, as Charlotte and Cilla are going to talk about, is the people, the relationship between the different individuals. So the senior executives that have to set the purpose and drive the process, the people that are going to be going through the change while the processes are changing, and how they're engaging in that with the trust and with the sort of support. The fourth P is partners. So partners, I think, are going to be so important here when we're implementing AI. There's a client we're working with at the moment who are using their own team to build some of these trials with AI. But there are already organizations and partners, technology partners, who have already built these platforms where you can relatively quickly plug and play and implement these new AI processes. So organizations now need to understand how they're going to build those external relationships with IT partners, or like the partners of OpenAI or the language model, where you're going to be trusting your data and trusting your processes. And then the last P, which comes back in the circle, is what is your performance measures? And in some organizations and some industries, previously the performance measures might have been out billable hours, for example, in a law firm or consulting firm. Now with AI, the solutions and the things the humans were creating and the team members were creating before can now be done within a very short time using the power of AI. So does the performance measure now need to change to values of output? Does it now need to change to different sort of metrics than previously you would have used? So that is a framework that maybe would help to give context and structure to some of your thinking of how you're going to do these changes. So I'd like to take you through an example now. A couple of organizations I'm working with at the moment, which are going to be using AI augmented audio AI. So when a customer phones in, so one of the applications is sort of high street health, so dental, chiropractors, physiotherapists, that these systems are being installed in. So if the customer wants to phone in to make an appointment, the current reception was only open when the facility was open, or there was just an answering machine. The availability now of the AI assistant to be able to answer the phone, welcome, ask the person what their name is, and check the customer system to see when their next appointment is, to be able to book a new appointment. The cost of that now is relatively low. So for a few £100 a month compared to a couple of £1,000 a month for a staff member, the mundane task could be taken by the AI system. These are integrated to the system. The empathy and tone maybe is not as good as a human because there's natural empathy in that there, but the tone and the programming and the logic now can include that depending on what the customer is talking about. Say, oh, I've got a big pain, I really need an appointment with the dentist, can you urgently do that? The AI will pick up on that urgency and could change the booking and that relevant and that to it. Consistency and compliance. The AI systems are now trained on all the rules that are relevant and that for the particular sector, and won't go outside of those rules or the guardrails and that. And the systems can escalate the system to a human if it's sort of needed. If the person ringing in said, well, look, I really need to speak to somebody about this, then they can pass them through, and that to the receptionist or the person who's working in that within the facility. But those individuals in the teams within those organizations have now got more time to spend with the customers face to face when they come into those particular venues. So what we're really saying is the AI is not the almighty. It's not going to be better than your best receptionist or your best team worker, but they're always available. So compared to the alternative of the customer not having an answer on the phone, or only have an answering machine and have to wait a couple of days to get the call back after the weekend, these things can now be done sort of straight away. So that's just one example where I think the technology is now good enough and with the right implementation can be brought in, and within the parameters that Charlotte and Cilla are going to be talking about, engaging the team on the changes and the processes that need to happen. The last little example I'd like to give, I published on a LinkedIn article, and it's really about an example of how AI can now be used to make some quite powerful business sort of decisions. So in this context, we've built an AI platform which looks at investment analysis. So if you're an investment fund, you might be receiving about 1,000 applications for investment, 1,000 pitch decks on an annual sort of type basis. Now, the AI system we've got now can review that data, review the pitch decks, review the business plans. It can do the analysis of those. It can do analysis of Companies House. It can go and do external research. It can do competitor analysis. It can look at the business models, and it can screen for the high potential opportunities. So say going from 1,000 down and narrowing that down to 200 that look like the sort of high potential. We then also, in this demonstration you can look at on LinkedIn, I say we programmed an avatar that looks like me to interview the entrepreneurs and to get additional information that might not have been within the pitch deck, or to clarify questions that we've got. And then we can then pass that to augment to the partners who then could make a decision in the investment. Now, one of the points I made earlier about the change in business model, the provocative and possible view that I've now got is, instead of the fund typically only investing on two or three ventures and investing $5 million or pounds in each, my view is we could take one of those 5 million investments and do 50 investments in 50 different businesses, say doing 100,000 in each. And then the AI system will help those in organizations who are typically startups with only 2 or 3 individuals, with the power of the AI data analysis, the power of the contacts we've got, the power of the knowledge and that we've got, to be able to help and augment those businesses. And when those businesses then become more successful, the investment follow on with the knowledge that the system has got can then drive those businesses forward. And that's just one example, I think, of where the business model would now change in an industry. And if you're a fund that is relying on doing it the old way of a lot of manual work, a lot of only doing £1 million investments, you will be late to the party, and your investment will not be accepted, because those startups will be successful and will follow on the investment from the ones who understand and know them. So what I wanted to cover here in my talk really is around the technology. I think is now good enough to be implemented in these specific use cases. Organizations need to think about how their business processes are changing, and then really think about how they move sort of forward. So I'd like to hand over now onto the next part. I'm happy to pick up questions later.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle with this conversation and really start to invite some feedback on some of the commentary that we've had as well, coming through some interesting expressions that I've never heard before about AI veganism as well coming into the chat. But I suppose in some way what I'm doing here is summarising a lot of the key messages that Andrew and Charlotte have shared with us so far. And we're going to come on and talk a little bit more about ethics as well shortly. My background, as I've expressed, is all about whole-scale organisational transformation and change, and particularly focused around sales, service and cultural leadership transformation. And if we then summarise some of the key messages that Andrew has delivered today, we can see that if we don't align clearly our opportunities with AI to our big ticket, our big hairy goals, our big ticket items in terms of our strategic intent, then we're going to be missing a trick. And in the previous webinars that we had, which I'm really happy to share the detail of, we talked through clarity around our clear story and narrative for change. This is no different in terms of our implementation of our thinking for AI than any other significant change program that an organization is going to be running. It needs a clear story for change. It needs a real clarity around strategic objectives and outcomes, clear pillars, and also picking up on some of the points that have come into the chat around service experience. If that is a prime outcome for your organization in terms of the enhancement of customer retention and customer growth in the future, then absolutely, how does the use of some of the examples that Andrew shared going to either augment that or mitigate some of the human interventions? So it's a real dilemma. It's a real dilemma that's going to be on people's agenda. If I'm summarizing this, I'm going to perhaps ask everybody who's on the call who feels that they can comment because they're in an organization where some of this is happening right now, maybe just to comment about which one of these three areas or others is really resonating for you around your key opportunities at the moment. Pop that into the chat while we're talking about them. One of the areas that we've talked about this morning is around the strategic value creation. And I think the key here is that this is not about improving productivity in a single area. This is about whole scale organizational change and creating new value chains, lower costs whilst maintaining quality. Absolutely. But how does that link in to the overall intent around increased productivity, development of particular skills and capabilities as well? That's a really interesting one when we put this into strategic value creation. And then we're talking about operational enhancement, and we've used some really great examples with the healthcare example that Andrew shared this morning. And then we're talking about competitive advantage as well. And we've been more recently talking to a client where who are massive in the automotive retail space, but really considering quite significantly how they ensure that they create opportunities for follow-up and feedback in a way that keeps them ahead of the game, one step ahead of both the customer and what might be happening in the market to ensure that they take bigger market share. So if I'm just having a quick look at what might have come into the chat. So right now, yeah, okay. Without structural guidance. So Claudia's point here is really key in this in terms of the risks that we can see that we're going to be, and this is often the conversations we've had over the last few webinars about the individual activities that might be going on without that aligned strategic approach. And this is a slide that we shared in our previous webinar around what the key risks to address are, both ethical, organizational, technical, and the personal risks for individuals, and potentially this area around compliance risks and regulation as well. So to answer some of the things that are coming up there, Andrew, if we could go to the next slide, what might some of these risks look like? What we're finding is, and this is interestingly because it's been supported by real data and research, is that there is a significant disconnect between boardroom enthusiasm and meaningful usage. And that's to the point that Claudia is just making in a commentary there. And this is interesting because this is the S&P 500 companies. This is obviously US futures market. I'm sure it would be exactly the same if we were looking at the FTSE 100 right now. But for only 44% of S&P 500 companies mention AI, but only 44% of them mention AI, only 10% actually implement it effectively for some of the reasons that we've discussed. And that cultural resistance and compliance concerns. I had an example yesterday of working with a significant broadband provider who really need to enhance their services in terms of credit and billing and credit control. And their conversations to me was, we really get what we need to do here, but our biggest challenge is our IT department are really concerned about what this is going to mean for them, and they are sitting in the dark ages, and we just need to bring them on the journey. We're finding that really, really hard. And the cultural resistance and compliance, therefore, creating some of the adoption barriers there. The lack of and fear of job displacement as well, I think, is part of that. So I'm going to hand on to Charlotte now to talk to us more about the embedding of the ethics into transformational change. And maybe we'll come back to some of the Q&A at the end in terms of the questions that have come up on here, and we could perhaps open some of these up. Charlotte, I'll hand to you.
Thank you, Cilla, and thank you, Andrew. And I'm absolutely fascinated about some of the conversation
Yeah.
that's coming up in the chat, specifically around risks and implementation and change of policy. And it links really nicely to some of the themes that I'm going to be sharing with us with regards to some things to think about how we start to think about ethical practices for transformational change in a world that is augmented with AI. And this picture is really just to show this is a real fine balancing act for us all to consider in all of our roles as our own personal use of AI at home, but also in the workplace and how organisations need to think about this moving forward. So if we consider some of the areas around the ethical principles associated to AI deployment, ethics is the foundation with regards to at the forefront of our strategic thinking with regards to the use of AI and how we start to consider this in our own personal and organisational context. And it's not the secondary afterthought. So we're bringing this much more to the forefront of our thinking in the change process rather than it being an afterthought with regards to actually we didn't consider that when we we're actually considering our strategic intent. So we're really building this further up the value chain than we might have done previously when we think about in the change process. Okay. So the reason why we're considering this is that we need to consider how this actually serves us from an organisational mission perspective. And when we start developing our corporate strategy and then a competitive strategy from a strategic element, we need to build this in much more earlier on in our thinking than what we might have done previously. Technology has always been there with regards to some of the processes and systems that we have, but now with building AI as a way of augmenting the human behaviour, our most, intangible and tangible resource that organisations have. The way that we can do this, I'm going to come on to some ways of why we might do this, but I'm just going to build this into actually some thinking around how do we bring our employees, our customers and communities on the journey with us. And I saw a point from Ruth in there with regards to the point I put here around society at large. What does this actually mean from our CSR perspective and our environmental responsibilities as well, with regards to actually, if we increase our use of AI, what does that mean for, the organisations that supply all the large data warehouses where the data needs to be stored? And what is the footprint impact on that? And how do we even consider, how do we offset that? So there's so many different stakeholder groups that we need to consider, not just the employees that might be the users, but how do our customers receive this? What does this say about us as an organisation with regards to some of the carbon footprint we might be leaving? So there's so many stakeholders we need to consider within this ethical principles. So it's complex. This is not easy stuff. This is stuff that we need to spend a lot of time around. We need to go on and then consider actually how do we still just keep this human, okay? Our human agency perspective. We need to maintain our human control and our decision-making criteria at the forefront of our processes when we build this. And these are just some areas I've considered with regards to some ethical principles that we need to consider. I'm just going to pick on one, okay, on here because there's, in the sake of time, to leave some conversation. The word that I'm going to think about here is particularly the word autonomy, okay? We need to respect from an ethical principle that human choice always will sit within this, and that we all have the choice and ethical principles with regards to what we might choose to do as individuals, and also how do we then consider that from an organisational perspective, and how do we build transparency and bring people on the journey of what we're doing with this to try and reduce resistance. And I love that terminology you shared, Claudia, around the AI veganism. I look forward to reading that article after today. Moving on and considering one of the areas that I've been considering through my work is actually how do we actually bring this into a process or a way of being that organisations can think about, and one way we can think about this is actually through a decision-making tree. At a most basic level, the things to consider about is this legal? Are we allowed to do it? So we can really think about it from a compliance point of view. does it align with our values? And what are values? So lots of organizations get moving very quickly, particularly if they're startups, and they haven't quite defined their culture and their values of who they are as an organization. The use of AI, I believe, for the work I do, needs to sit very much hand in hand with regards to the type of values that we talk about out to the market. This is what we stand for as an organization. And how does our use of AI sit within that? And it's not an afterthought, as I mentioned previously, it's at the forefront of our strategic decision making and intent of where we're heading. I would not be mistaken of, sort of potentially in my thinking, that a lot of organizations will potentially have to reevaluate their values and what they stand for and how this sits with AI moving forward. We then go on to consider actually the long-term consequences, and is this actually even acceptable with what we're doing, and who's actually going to be benefits from the use of AI, and who might bear the cost. And a way of doing this, which intervenes with this decision tree, is actually what we'd class within change is doing a diagnostic assessment, a stakeholder assessment to get feedback and thinking with regards to actually how do we bring employees potentially on the journey, but actually potentially customer groups, focus groups, policymakers, sustainability boards, whatever it might be. We need to really consider each of these stakeholder groups within this process of implementation, more so than we probably ever have done before, to make sure that the practice of how we use AI is then understood and then links to actually, can we have an explainability check about, are we being transparent with regards to our use? It's very easy from organizations potentially just to implement a technology, change a policy, but actually, have we brought people on the journey with us, and do people understand our strategic intent of why we're doing this? So I believe that actually this explainability check is one of the key areas that we need to consider. With regards to actually how we might do this from a governance structure in organisations, we can start thinking about areas around, should we have an ethics committee, a cross-functional team, potentially of legal, HR, tech and business representatives, to actually question this ethics tree, to really bring together the greatest thinking and how this actually sits with regards to where the organisation's heading. And then we can think about areas around employee voice mechanisms, bringing them on the journey and the voice of the customer, both internally and externally, to move this forward. So this regular ethics reviews is really important, and some of the areas where organisations have been considering this, and I've particularly chosen HR and finance as some examples, with regards to actually some of the biases that might potentially happen from a human perspective. So if we think about recruitment, lots of us have heard of with regards to how AI is now starting being used in recruitment. How do we potentially address some of that? This is what the computer says, and this is what we say from a human perspective. I think Mike put a comment in that in the chat with regards to this. And auditing is a key feature that we need to consider here. That sense check actually. Are we making best practice decisions using AI, and are we human checking them? Another area to consider, I'm going to pick on this from real world applications, particularly in the work that I do, is the skills development. How do we use AI to identify upskilling opportunities rather than replacing? So it's a different mindset. The AI is not necessarily going to replace something, but actually it's going to augment human capability to allow it to board. So these are some real world applications we can start to think from an ethical practice, taking it from the view of putting human at the centre of this. If we move on to consider some areas with regards to finance driven real world applications, how do we consider the use of finance innovation? And just the next slide, please, with regards to how we consider algorithmic fairness. So my background previously to the type of work I did was with regards to presenting individuals with their next best offer from a credit perspective. So really looking at the algorithmic behavior and our human behavior with regards to the types of offers that we're presented, with data that's coming in from different banks, to ensure that the lending decisions are really, really tested and have a human element on it rather than just trusting the data. So this is already building on an element of robotic automation already. The other area I was just going to talk about is our own individual credit scoring as well. So for those of you who might be familiar with this, with the three main providers, with TransUnion, Experian and Equifax in the market, how are they using the credit scoring system and the AI data that's coming in through the various different payment service providers and the banks and fintechs now to really give better AI decision-making process with regards to the type of credit that we're allowed as individuals. So there's so many different use cases that are coming up with regards to the use of AI and the ethical practice supported by that. And what will be interesting for any organisation that's testing these these types of use cases is actually how transparent are they being with regards to how they're making the decision. So really going back to that ethical decision making tree is we're using your consumer data or your organizational data to actually help make these types of decisions, and the stories that organizations tell us will be at the forefront of actually us as individuals determining actually is that an ethical practice that sits with me comfortably as an individual. And as at the end of the day, we are all different. So there'll be a very different standpoint and viewpoint on this. So it's kind of a whistle-stop tour of ethics, and I could talk about this for at least an hour in itself as a topic. But let's go on to some questions and that are coming up. And I think Cilla's going to host this bit for us.
I think we're coming to the end of that for today. Andrew, just hand to you just to do a final wrap up, but we will share all of these slides with you. There's many requests for that too. Yeah.
Thank you, Cilla. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you, everybody, for your very engaging chat and conversation that we've had. So some of the key takeaways from today and from the previous sessions: human alignment is going to be really foundational to AI success. Working through the ethics and building that in, not as an afterthought, is really important. Thinking about your purpose, your process, your people, your partners, and your performance measures is going to be really important for your strategic implementation. And being proactive about your risk is going to be really important as well. So transformation is beyond just about productivity. It's about how the organization is going to change. So thank you. And please do join our LinkedIn group to continue the conversation. And we will be distributing the presentation and making the video from the key presentation available, and that's you as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Please do reach out to us if you would like to discuss any topic that's come up today in any more detail, and do join our LinkedIn group.